Story 1. Once, I was short on cash at a coffee shop, and the person in line behind me paid for my drink without hesitation. It was such a small thing, but it stuck with me because it was just pure kindness. Story 2. I used to live above my landlord, who was also a chef. One night, he made me a delicious bowl of pasta and sent his two little sons to deliver it to me. There was no occasion or anything. The pasta was great, and we got our full deposit back when we moved out. He was a good person. It is worth mentioning that he only owned the house, and we lived in the upstairs, not some big real estate company. Story 3. Can't help but think about the legendary Today Me, Tomorrow You. Story 4. One time when I was 17, I fell asleep crying with my head on a friend's lap. She did not want to wake me, so she just let me sleep for over 2 hours, never moving an inch, without eating or making a sound. She is still my friend to this day. People like her are worth holding on to. Story 5. During my first programming competition, I was extremely nervous and quiet, as I was the only first-year student and everyone seemed to know each other. This girl from third year suddenly introduced herself and offered to shake hands, then proceeded to have a casual conversation with me. She continued to ensure that I never felt unsafe or lonely by staying by my side throughout the day until night. She is the sweetest and kindest person I have ever met. I genuinely wish her nothing but success. I realized that she was the only person I got to talk to the whole day. Story 6. I was once at a close friend's place, just relaxing after work when my dad called. I lied and said I was on my way home. I was speaking in a language my friend didn't understand, but he figured my dad was interrogating me about where exactly I was, why he couldn't hear any traffic, or that it was pouring outside. In a split second, my friend pulled out his phone and played some traffic sounds to help me through the phone call. I don't think he will ever be able to fathom what this gesture meant to me. I live with so much weight in my heart and guilt for not being able to live a normal life, for not being able to give enough time to my friends, etc. I never knew I could feel so seen and understood without even having to ask for it. My friend hates hugs, even after nearly 6 years of knowing one another, but this felt like the warmest hug anyone could ever give me. I think about this very often, and life is difficult sometimes, but I'm counting these small acts of kindness. Story 7. Long story short, it was about 15 years ago. I was living out of my van with expired tags, and I spent my days at a local public park. I could shower there and just walk around. A police officer who came through every day noticed me and my expired tags. He ended up not giving me a ticket, telling me I could ask the Department of Motor Vehicles for an extension. He proceeded to give me his business card, telling me to call him if I needed anything. As he walked away, I looked at his card and he slipped me some cash under the card. He was gone before I could even thank him. I will never forget him and his kindness. Story 8. Okay, so I had a really bad accident when I was pushing my baby in a cart. Admittedly, it was my fault. The cart ended up dragging me down the parking lot, and I don't know how, but I managed to hold the cart up as I was being pulled, and my son never had a single scrape. My purse flew out, my groceries, I just left them. I picked up my son and was checking him when an older man brought me my purse and all my groceries and helped us get everything into the car. The poor man was mortified. My leg looked like it had been in a grinder. There was no skin left at all. Story 9. For context, I live in a very small southern town. We only have one grocery store, so you get to know the folks that work there, and they know you. I was pregnant with my first baby but lost her at 22 weeks gestation shortly before Mother's Day in 2020. So I went rather dramatically from looking pretty pregnant to not. The next time I went in, one of the older gentlemen who worked in the produce department very kindly expressed his condolences and also wished me a happy Mother's Day. It is hard to convey the sentiment. From the wrong person, it could seem a horribly insensitive and inappropriate comment. But during the weirdness and isolation of lockdowns, I had not really been able to have a normal pregnancy, baby shower, etc., and did not have any family in the area. So to have someone acknowledge her loss in person and also recognize me as a mother was so incredibly meaningful to me during such a period of isolation. It was probably a 2-minute long interaction at most, but it has stuck with me years later and still makes me tear up. Story 10. It was 1958 and I was going to a small county elementary school in 6th grade. A guy in my 6th grade class was the best looking, best athlete, and smartest guy in our class, Mr. Everything. The 6th grade held a Halloween social every year. It was the only school dance I ever went to. Well, the girl down the street from me wanted to dance with this guy, but he was dancing with the most popular girl all night. She started to cry in the corner, and someone went to him and told him what was going on. He came over and asked her to dance. She was smiling from ear to ear. She wasn't the best-looking or popular girl, but even at 11 or 12, he made her day. I'm 78 years old and still tear up thinking about it. What a great guy. He was the high school quarterback and baseball pitcher, then went on to an Ivy League college. Story 11. I was a very troubled 19-year-old runaway in New York City who had just passed out on the street after walking out of the doctor's office. I had a procedure done but hadn't completely recovered from the anesthesia. A very concerned lady in her 30s stopped and talked to me for a few minutes. Then she walked next door and bought me a carton of orange juice and sat with me while I sipped on it. Once I started to perk up, she sat with me for a good 10 minutes. She made sure I had someone to call and that I was feeling steady before she left. It was the kindest thing a stranger has ever done for me, and I will never forget it. Story 12. One time, I was on a lunch break at my work and I barely had any money in my account. I was going to use the last of it to buy lunch for the day, and before I could pay, a man and his wife stepped in and offered to pay for my food, which I gladly accepted. Story 13. In high school, I ended up taking shop class as an elective. I was nerdy and into computers and music, and I thought shop was for the less capable students, so I wasn't happy. There was one other student in the class, a year or two older, who was clearly passionate about it. For some reason, I always thought to myself what a Neanderthal loser he must be. One day in class, I was struggling with something. A simple high school shop class project made of wood, and I was clearly not grasping it. That one student saw me and came over to help. He was totally friendly and kind, not patronizing in any way. He was encouraging. I felt so ashamed afterward for having been such an arrogant, judgmental person toward this guy, who not only had the skills I lacked but was also a genuinely kind individual. It turned out to be a valuable life lesson. Story 14. How about many acts of kindness? Does that count? My soon-to-be 98-year-old neighbor, Bob, is an example. Bob has lived next door to us for nearly 30 years. During that time, I have seen him transform his small half-acre property into a Garden of Eden, filled with olive trees from which he makes oil, fruit trees, and all kinds of berries. He raises free-range chickens and has several hives of honeybees producing honey. The thing that makes him a kind person isn't that he is good at growing things, but that he shares everything he grows with the entire neighborhood. He genuinely cares about the people he meets, taking the time to get to know each one. He knows the names of every neighbor within a half-mile of his home. His home is always filled with guests, and the sounds of their friendly laughter can be heard from a fair distance. He is never lonely. Bob hands out his extra eggs, along with his olive oil and honey, and pretty much shares everything he has. Because he is who he is, people love him and reciprocate his generosity by sharing their excess bounty as well. I see neighbors stopping by with kitchen scraps for his chickens all the time. Many pitch in to help him get the olives picked when ripe and aid in the pressing. Without a doubt, this man has taught me some very valuable lessons about kindness, human behavior, and generosity. I shall miss him and grieve his loss deeply when the time finally comes that he is no more. Story 15. My dad died suddenly, and a friend made a lasagna and left it outside our family home. They didn't want to disturb us but knew we wouldn't be in the frame of mind to cook. Story 16. After coming up with something that was a small act, but not actually small, I came up with something light. On several flights, I have witnessed flight attendants being a snack or a toy to especially harried pre-boarding parents. And the heavier one, I used to work under a medical professional who embodied everything I disliked. She was much older, a classic Southern belle, who cared about appearances and social standing. I was better than that. One of our patients was another aspect of everything I disliked. She was young, with a husband, 2 very small children, and end-stage cancer. We would take her to the hospital for pain control, and she would berate us all the way. What had my medical professional done with her life? Why was I staffing an ambulance after taking a whole fancy degree? My medical professional's response only further convinced me that she was an airhead. No matter what our patients said, she would only respond kindly. She would even call our doctors for permission to administer better medications. We watched our patient's living situation downgrade as we kept responding. House, apartment, a couple of steps to a crummier apartment, room in her parents' house. When we arrived one night, her agonal breathing made plain that we would not be transporting her anywhere. So I watched my medical professional, who had been told so many times about being such a waste of space, attach a 4-lead electrocardiogram, sit beside her, take her hand, and stroke her hair. She told her that she was so loved and so treasured, and that going would not need forgiving. Afterwards, I asked how she had been able to do that. My medical professional explained that she had known that our patient had been so cruel only because she was suffering badly, knowing that she could not help leaving her husband and children behind, and that it was all the harsher for seeing the cost of her treatment bankrupt them even as it failed. She told me that kindness matters even with everything minor, but especially carries weight in a case where someone is suffering so horribly. That it may be the only thing you have to give while providing care, but that it is only your ego keeping you from realizing that it is actually inexpensive. That its gift to anyone is profound. That not only changed my approach to patient care, but also to life. We know that this is not a thing in other countries. The Americans you meet on Reddit are not representative of our voting demographics. Story 17. I work in a supermarket collecting and packing up customers' groceries. My dad had just lost his unexpected battle with cancer, and I had just come back to work after taking some time off. I had my arms full of milk, and I was carrying it to my cart when one of the cartons slipped away and broke. One of my coworkers happened to walk past me and saw all of this happening, so she immediately rushed to pick up the broken milk carton so it wouldn't leak anymore. She took it to the trash and even brought me a new one, all without asking. It really warmed my heart. She was so sweet. I'm sure it wasn't a big deal to her, but to me it was and still is. Sometimes I wonder if I should tell her everything and truly thank her from the bottom of my heart and praise her for her kindness and the huge impact she left on me, if she even remembers any of it. It was so heartwarming and amazing to see such kindness. I really needed that. Always be kind to people, you never know what they might be going through. Story 18. I once saw a barista pay for a tired nurse's coffee, thanking her for her hard work. The nurse teared up, saying it was the nicest thing that had happened to her all week. Story 19. When I was riding my bike as a kid, my chain fell off on the side of the road. A pickup truck pulled up, and a gruff-looking man got out. Of course, my first thought was stranger danger. But instead, he came up, noticed the issue right away, fixed my chain for me, and went on his way. It has been probably 30 years, and I still remember him. Story 20. One day, not long after graduating from college, I was on a back road on my way to visit some friends. I thought I had enough gasoline to make it to the closest gasoline station, but I definitely did not. I ended up stuck in the middle of nowhere, with minimal cell service, and nobody answering when I could get a call through. An older gentleman from a house on the road saw me and offered me some gasoline so I could make it to the gasoline station. I offered to bring back money or a refilled gasoline container, but he declined. Instead, he told me to pay it forward. Almost 20 years later, I try to pay it forward when I can because this moment still stays with me. Story 21. It was my first day in the 8th grade. First days of school were almost always half days, so I didn't bring any lunch money. However, due to a teacher's strike, school was delayed in starting by 2 weeks. One of the lunch monitors noticed I wasn't eating and gave me some money to buy my lunch. I still remember it almost 50 years later. Story 22. This is really silly, but I have had anxiety since I was a kid. One time, my small school took us to a park that was across a two-way street. I was 6 years old. I loved animals and went to play with some worms, and I missed my teacher's whistle. I had a panic attack when I saw that no one was near me. A middle-aged man reached me, calmed me down, and took me back to my school. I could have been kidnapped that day, and that man being decent to a terrified child was something I will never forget. Story 23. I have been fortunate to have many experiences I could write about here, but one in particular has been on my mind lately. I had severe depression for most of my life, and I lost a friend to suicide while I was in college. I took a few days off, but when I came back, I was still really struggling. I started crying during an exam and could not stop. The professor said I could make up the exam and to go talk to the campus counselor, who thankfully was well aware of my situation already. While the counseling center saved me in so many ways and so many times, the kindness that really stuck with me that day was that after the exam was over, the professor came to the counseling center to check on me. I heard the conversation through the door, and while the counselor did not disclose any information about me, not even to confirm or deny whether I had been there, I heard the professor ask if he had done the right thing, and if there was anything else he could have done for me. I heard in his questions that I mattered. Later that year, the counseling center helped me organize and host a suicide prevention event on campus. So many of my professors and classmates participated, but this professor specifically emailed me to emphasize that, while his class would end just as my event ended, he would absolutely be there. And you know what? He came rushing over just in time. So many years later, I am crying now as I write this. The care and compassion this professor and everyone else on that campus showed me far exceeded any possible job description. Dr. Randall Parrish and everyone at the University of North Georgia, if you ever read this somehow, you made a real difference in my life. Thank you. Story 24. When my stepson was about 5, his mother, who was never present, came by our house to let us know she had no money for Christmas and therefore did not want her son to come over. My son's half-sister was in the car, and she had this little stuffed skunk that a friend gave her for Christmas. She ran up to my door, crying all the way, and she gave the toy to her brother. I cried my eyes out, then found the exact skunk online and bought it for her. She was about 8 years old when she did that, and every Christmas I make sure to buy her something very special. I will love her forever for being so selfless and wanting the best for her brother, even when her mother did not care. Story 25. During what must have been the world's muddiest metal festival ever, 2 people helped a third person with a wheelchair through the mud. Story 26. Once I had lunch at Ramensa, and when it came time to pay, I realized my wallet was in my jacket pocket in my office. I had taken it off to go walking in the rare sunny Chicago afternoon, during which walk I decided to stop in for lunch. The manager told me, "No problem. Pay next time you come by." Thankfully, my office was only a 5-minute walk away, and I was back within 15 minutes. I will never forget the calm, non-judgmental way I was treated. Story 27. I was, admittedly, a teenager on a trip in China with my family. We just arrived and, predictably, went outside of the airport. It was, unfortunately, pretty late at night, and as we clearly knew nobody spoke English, we thankfully came prepared with a translation app. The whole place was undeniably so big. We somehow managed to get to the main road with all of our luggage and surprisingly saw a lot of taxis on the streets. We frantically called them out, but frustratingly nobody bothered to stop. We had been desperately trying to get a taxi but ultimately failed miserably. We all anxiously thought we might have to spend the night here or maybe get back to the airport, but it was unfortunately quite far away. Then, suddenly, an older man came up to us and unintelligibly said something we didn't understand before abruptly leaving. About 15 minutes later, a taxi unexpectedly approached us, and that same man astonishingly came out of the car. He must have intuitively understood the whole situation despite having no conversation with us. He generously helped us out that night, and we thankfully reached the hotel safely. Story 28. I am a waiter at a small restaurant in my hometown. I usually wait on the big tables for events, which include about 10 to 15 covers per table. One night, there was a particularly large table of about 18, and there was this one older woman at the table who was elegantly dressed, while everyone else was in casual clothes. She looked incredibly defeated because everyone else was ignoring her. So I went up behind her and said, "You look gorgeous. I have never seen a woman become so radiant and joyful in my life," and she ended up leaving a £50 tip for the table. In Scotland, Tipping is not necessary and is more of a kind gesture to the waiter. That was the biggest tip I have ever received at this job. Story 29. I was 16 and flying to New Zealand by myself with a layover both ways in Australia. On the way back, my connection was cancelled. My mom wasn't picking up the phone and I didn't know anyone in Australia, so I was crying on the airport floor, thinking I was effectively stranded until the next flight 24 hours later. A very kind family nearby saw me crying and asked if I needed help, which I gladly accepted. The wife took me to where her husband was in line to get food, cab, and hotel vouchers, and he walked me through all the steps. Despite having 3 children of their own, they made sure we were at the same hotel, waited for me to get an emergency visa, and had me check in with them in the morning before I went to see the Sydney Opera House. They waited for me to come back to the hotel to leave, and we took the same cab back to the airport. They offered to ask someone in their row if they could switch seats with me on the flight back to the United States. I'm still friends with them on social media, and I share a birthday with one of their daughters. For as long as I live, I'll never forget how kind they were to me. A random 16-year-old crying on the airport floor. Story 30. When I was in summer camp, we were lining up to buy things like sweets and shirts at the camp shop. Since we were kids, most of us had just been given an amount of physical money by our parents to deposit in our accounts. If we weren't keeping track of everything we bought, which was the case for most kids, we didn't really know how much money we had left. It was the second weekend, and I had already bought a hoodie and a bunch of sweets. I was in line to buy a water bottle and some chocolates and candy when it reached my turn. The lady working at the shop said I didn't have enough money left to buy everything. With that, I started separating some things to leave behind. I paid and left to find my friends. A few moments later, a boy came rushing after me and handed me a bag. He said he was behind me in line and saw what had happened. When I opened the bag, there was literally every single thing I had left behind. Story 31. Yesterday, at the food bank, my autistic child had an absolute panic attack and meltdown about needing strawberries. I could not see any strawberries and had no idea where this meltdown came from. The 2 men in front turned around and said, "Here, have our strawberries." It was one of the kindest things that has happened in weeks or months, who knows, but having someone else also in need be so generous felt out of this world. We have $20 to last the week. There is no way we could ever afford strawberries. Those men changed a little bit of my heart. Unprompted, at the end, my little 4-year-old found them and gave them her sticker, which is a cute thing the food bank does to keep kids entertained. Anyway, it reminded me that even when you are at the very bottom, the kindness often feels very radical, even over something so small as strawberries. The hope is there, folks. Story 32. When I was a kid, I witnessed my brother almost fall into the Grand Canyon. My mom was yelling angrily and grabbed him, then snapped at me to hurry up and follow them. I was terrified by what I had seen and because I was standing on a patch of ice, and if I moved I was going to slip too. I couldn't speak as I watched them walk away. I was also afraid that I would be in trouble too. A stranger noticed, and she reached her hand out to me to help me off the ice. I think about that moment a lot. A simple, silent gesture that has stayed with me for 24 years. Story 33. I had just received some bad news as I was driving back to my apartment one day. Once I parked the car, I broke down sobbing in my parking spot outside my building. The elderly neighbor who lived upstairs must have walked by my car and saw me because the next thing I knew, I heard my car door open and felt her wrapping me in a hug, telling me it would all be okay. I had just moved there recently and didn't know many of the people in the building. I had only talked to her a handful of times. But the fact that she didn't hesitate to comfort me in my time of need is something I think about often. Story 34. Someone on here changed my life. I left a random comment about what I was going through with my situation, and this person contacted me. I am out of that situation now as money was the only thing grounding me. I am not debt-free yet. I still have about 2,000 United States dollars of debt left. But man, did she save me. I managed to pay some of my debt, but most importantly, it allowed me to get away. He was so messed up with me that I could no longer justify it. Her contribution literally made it impossible for him to hurt me further. He has no power or authority over me. She literally saved me, This week, I had a little more, so I gave it to a struggling college student who had basically $5 to her name. I gave her 1,000 South African Rand, which is a bit less than 10% of my salary. I merely asked her to pass it along, give what you get. That 800 was life-changing for me. One stream of debt paid off. Another is a bit less than halfway now. Thank you. Story 35. The most recent event was someone buying my friend and me a discontinued flavor of one of our favorite drinks. I have had and given many gifts. This occurred just the other day. Story 36. I was hit by a drunk driver and ended up in the ditch. An older gentleman stopped and broke my window open so I could get out. I will never forget that man or how kind he was to get me help. Story 37. It was April 2018, and I was going through the lowest phases of my life, both professionally and personally. A work colleague whom I thought was a decent human being turned out not to be one and tried to throw me under the bus to save their face at work. I stood up for myself but was heartbroken because I was already going through enough and felt betrayed. I called my former boss to vent, who had always been supportive, and broke down on the phone. He said to me, "Stop being so nice," which was a light bulb moment for me. I was walking from my office to the bus stop while talking to him. When my bus arrived, I hung up, sat down, put my head down and started bawling my eyes out. It was a seat for two, and I did not realize that my whole body was shaking. It was obvious to everyone on the bus that I was sobbing as if someone had died. A girl who had been standing was watching me and was clearly worried. So she sat next to me and asked if I was okay and if I was crying because of a guy. I just nodded because I could not get any words out. She was a total stranger, and I don't even remember her face because it was around 9:30 p.m., and the bus was poorly lit. I was hesitant to face her because I was so embarrassed. I will always be grateful to her for showing me the kindness and compassion that even people in my life at that time could not be bothered to offer me. Story 38. One summer day during my lunchtime walk about 8 years ago, I saw this homeless man lying on the ground, right in the street. Not on the sidewalk, in the street. I didn't know what to do, or if I would have done anything at all. I was scared that he would get run over, but I froze. I felt useless. Turns out I didn't need to do anything. This very assertive woman ran up to him, money in her hand, and told him to get up out of the street. "You don't need to do that." What I gathered from her comment was that he was begging and was ignored, so he just gave up and lay down in the street. "Get up." And he did. He took her money and started to cry. My heart broke, but she told him, "It's okay. It's okay. There is no shame in accepting help. I have been where you are." Oh my God. I was in awe of that woman. Story 39. On holiday in Dubai, in a taxi on our way back from Abu Dhabi, we decided to save money and asked our taxi driver to drop us off at a metro station, which he did. The metro station is actually not finished yet. It is still being built. One of the workers on the site offered to give us a lift to the next one that is open. He did offer us a lift all the way to our hotel, but I felt that would be too much and did not want to inconvenience him. Story 40. I was in the car with a colleague who was driving when we passed by my hairdresser, who flashed their headlights at us. My colleague did not flash back or react. It was nothing, but it meant everything. Story 41. I try to pay it forward. If someone is short and I can cover it, I will gladly give them the money. You never know when you will be in that situation. Story 42. I was at the dollar store a few years ago, buying a bunch of things for my class. The woman and her child in front of me asked what I was doing, and I said, "Oh, I am buying all these stockings and candy because I do Elf on the Shelf with my children, and every day I put a couple of candies in their stockings. I also put little gifts in their stockings like little footballs or Pokemon cards or whatever. I was planning on spending about $75 because I had bought stuff previously." She smiled, rang up her items in front of me, and then left without another word. When I got to the counter, the cashier said the lady in front of me had given me enough money to pay for everything I had. I went to try to find the lady to thank her, but she was gone. Complete kindness, and I will never forget it. Story 43. Years ago, around Christmas time, My family joined a group of friends who were delivering warm clothes and other essentials to a homeless encampment in the city. There was an older gentleman living there whose shoes were very worn out, but none of the shoes we had brought were big enough for him. It was later in the evening, and a group of us were trying to figure out what stores we could get shoes at that would still be open at that time. My brother, who was 16 at the time, turned to us and said, "It's okay, I got it," took the shoes off of his feet and gave them to the man, who was so grateful. I will never forget the selflessness that my brother showed. He is a wonderful young man, and I am so proud of him. Story 44. Shitposting on Reddit helped me get through medical school when I moved thousands of miles away from home and didn't know anybody at first. Even though I spent a lot of time on Reddit, I still managed to balance the entertainment with my studies so that my grades didn't suffer. I hadn't shitposted as much recently since I've been busier, but I definitely enjoyed it and appreciated the people whom I interacted with on Reddit. Eventually, someone who enjoyed my posts and noticed my username said she would send me pictures after I graduated, and she remembered months later, which was pretty kind of her. The funniest part is she ended up getting into medical school a year later and is now in residency. Story 45. I once lost my wallet on a busy street, and a woman chased me down for a block to return it. Inside was cash I had forgotten about, but she insisted she was just glad I had it back. I will never forget how she went out of her way, with no expectation of anything in return. Story 46. One day, my partner and I were at a market. We got a bunch of items for a date night dinner, a beautiful charcuterie display. We were planning on splitting the bill, no problem, because it was a treat for us both, and we decided to splurge on some items. There was a lady behind us. She insisted on paying for our dinner, stating that we should not be splitting it and that she would love to take care of it for us. We were both astonished and tried to refuse. Then she gave us a good-hearted ribbing, saying, "How dare you respect our welders by refusing?" We call her the lady over 80, as that is how she referred to herself. She insisted, and it was beautiful because she saw us wanting to take care of each other, and then she took care of us. She will forever be remembered for that beautiful dinner and the kindest act. Story 47. About a year ago, I was on the subway in Manhattan. At one stop, I noticed that at the other end of the car, a man holding his sleeping child stepped on. The doors closed, we started moving, and then at that same end of the car, a young man wearing headphones stood up and motioned to the other man who had just gotten on that he could sit down. I didn't see any words exchanged, just some nods. Such a small thing, but I know that in that moment, the father was relieved to be able to sit. Story 48. Super small, and some may think it is silly. However, there have been a few times when I was at the grocery store, buckling my young daughter into her seat, and people offered to put my cart away for me so I did not have to leave her. Usually it was raining, which is why I put her in first. I have also had an older gentleman offer to help load my groceries while I buckle her due to the rain. Story 49. I was doing a small grocery shop after work, and my debit card decided to be demagnetized at that moment. The assistant suggested that I see if the ATM outside could read the card to withdraw cash. I went, but it was not a chance. A woman standing in the queue took out her card, paid for my groceries, and I was so stunned that I probably said a not-so-audible thank you. I went out feeling a bit lucky, but at the same time, a bit regretful that a random stranger paid for my things. Story 50. Just now, a gentleman moved a big tree branch out of the way so I could turn my car around in a quite narrow spot in the yard. Felt great that he cared enough to help a stranger out. Story 51. My brother took his two sons to a walking trail that had an ice cream shop nearby. He was enjoying his day and decided to get ice cream as a treat. He ordered them, and the staff were making them as fast as they could because they were busy. However, he checked his wallet and realized he didn't have cash on him. He tried to cancel his order, but the owner insisted, saying, "Not on my watch. You guys are getting your cones." My brother returned another day and repaid him. Story 52. The man in front of me at the grocery store paid in cash. He told the cashier to give me the change, $40. So I split it with the cashier and asked him to give the customer behind me half of my $20. I then took my $10 and gave it to the panhandler outside. I felt amazing. Story 53. I was on a 6-hour flight home, and my debit card wouldn't work on the plane when I got thirsty and wanted to buy a Pepsi from the flight attendant. I gave it back when my card failed and felt pretty awkward. A few minutes later, the attendant came back over and suddenly returned the Pepsi because a few rows down someone had overheard what happened, and they paid for it for me. I know it was only a simple drink, but that was a very pleasant surprise, especially because it came from a complete stranger. I stood up and turned to see who it was and made sure to thank him. Story 54. I wasn't feeling great and left a shop to find a seat while my husband paid for the items we had. I left and couldn't find a seat, feeling like I was about to pass out, so I rested against a bin. A lady in the seats opposite immediately told me to take her seat and asked if I needed help. By that stage, I couldn't speak and could only point. She bought me a bottle of water and waited for my husband to return. Thankfully, I know the sign for thank you and really wished I had been well enough to pay for her coffee, but I will try to pay it forward when I can. Story 55. I was living in a sober house when I first started college at Virginia Commonwealth University. I mainly took the bus to get to campus since I did not have a car at the time. The bus stop was about a block away from the house, but one day I was waiting for the bus while it was absolutely pouring rain. This bus stop was not covered and did not have a bench. A lady stopped and asked me if I needed a ride, stating she was heading in that direction anyway. She turned out to be one of the friendliest people I have ever met, and I enjoyed my 15-minute conversation with her on the way over. It made my week, especially since I was going through a hard time. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.